Welcome back to Mina Cup, Inside the Game, the podcast where we have real conversations with those helping shape the future of football. Today's guest, Scott Miller, is a man who works out in elite environments in different countries far across the world. Welcome, Scott.
Chris, great to be here, mate. Looking forward to having a conversation.
You've had a unique journey, haven't you? From Melbourne to 20 years in Europe in different roles. How did it all start?
When you put it that way, very unique. Football was in its infancy. You know, you had the old NSL days as well, where I was playing, and ultimately the development of players was quite limited at that time. So, like you, grew up watching the Premier League. I think back when I was young, we had an hour with Martin Tyler about 9 o'clock every Monday night, and it was a highlight package. So, spent my time watching that, and Sundays they did the same for the Serie A. So that was our exposure to professional football. Bravely or stupidly, however you look at it, it's paid dividends, demonstrating that bravery. But had a great time. Bought a one-way ticket, mate, and jumped on a plane. Started knocking on doors. Spoke to about 4 or 5 clubs. Got a few rejections and what are you doing here, Skippy? That type of stuff. What's your background? It's Australian football, jog on type carry on. But was fortunate enough at the time. It was interesting. So my cousin lived in Clapham, and that's where I based myself. And the ironic thing about it is Fulham was the last club I actually contacted, and I did a bit of research and I found out that this guy, the performance director, his name was Steve Nance, and he was a famous Australian fitness coach at the time. So basically bluffed the phone call that I knew him through the switchboard, and asked if it would be okay if I bought him a coffee, and took him to Starbucks and bought the biggest coffee in the world, you know, the big soup bowls, and told the girl behind the counter just keep filling them up. Because I wanted to spend so much time with this guy just to learn about the industry. I must have impressed him to some degree, because he said, okay, listen, you've got something about you. There's obviously the bravery coming from Australia. I like to help young people. And he invited me in. He invited me into the inner sanctum, as they call it. And the following Monday, I found myself wearing a Fulham Club trackie, standing next to some famous footballers, Boel Morte, McBride. And I spent the next 6 weeks working from academy to the first team, so my days were long, but had an incredible experience. And fortunately enough, I showed enough to him and the technical team, and they gave me a job. And I found myself in Hong Kong 6 to 7 weeks later at the Asia Trophy with a big suite overlooking Hong Kong, playing against Liverpool and South China and Portsmouth, and I couldn't believe it. But you know, one thing we're going to talk about today is the belief that young players need. Getting on that plane, I knew it was going to happen. I knew I'd make it happen.
It's an amazing self-belief, isn't it? And I think that's one of the main characteristics that you need to be able to play at the top level. Yeah. Those coaches that you worked with at Fulham, like if you can just run me through some of those on the traits that they had as well.
Yeah, interesting enough, it's I didn't need to move. I've only had 4 or 5 clubs in my career. I spent almost 10 years at Fulham. But the good thing about that was, and the bad thing potentially, we had an ownership change, but we also had numerous managers as well. So I actually worked with 7 in total during that period of time. We had Chris Coleman to begin with, highly charismatic coach, and was really a stalwart of that club. He was a player and then a coach, and a strong leader. That didn't work out for him, but he had obviously had his time at the club. We had a short interim spell with a gentleman called Laurie Sanchez. That didn't work out for the club either, or for himself. And then the club was really astute. The CEO, a young Alistair McIntosh from Man City, joined the club, and he brought Roy Hodgson in. And that's probably the first time in football I saw a coach, one, recruit for the right time, psychologically recruit the right players that could deal with the pressure of a relegation fight, because this was my first year, so this was all new, and ultimately brought in a profile of player psychologically that, one, can deal with the pressure, and 2, allow the club to survive. And an incredible story. I remember the day we were driving down to Portsmouth, the last game of the season, and imagine this: you've packed your bags 12 months before. You've got this dream job. You're on nothing. I think the first contract was like a bit of paper that just flew. It was nothing on it. But I don't even remember looking at it. I just signed it. I said, right, every morning I'm walking through there, and I've got my track in. I'm working with players. But I just remember that day so fondly, because it was either Championship or Premier League down to one game. And in the hotel the night before, I just remember my first instances of seeing proper leadership and how calm Roy was. The messaging didn't change. The game was enormous for the club in terms of survival, but the environment he created was so calm and still, and everyone knew their roles. And I just remember a wide free kick with about 5-10 minutes to go, and Jimmy Bullard launched it in, and a player that Danny Murphy, went up, and the most unlikely person to win a header in that 18-yard box, he goes up, and hits the side of his head and goes in and rattles the side netting. So we go berserk because, you know, what people don't understand is, of a relegation fight, you're going to lose 50% of your salary, and potentially I would have lost my job then and there, and my time in football could have been shorter. But thanks to Danny, and don't worry about it, on the bus on the way home, he reminded everyone, he goes, just remember, I kept you in the Premier League. And Jimmy Bullard was trying to take some scope of that as well. But that was the start of the journey. Survival one. Being exposed to that level of pressure, Chris, in my first year was immense. But Roy Hodgson's ability to stabilise a club, guide a team to survival, full credit to him.
And you went in there as a sports scientist, fitness coach. How did that journey in terms of your coaching journey, how did that play out?
Yeah, great question. So obviously I'd played since I was 8 years old in the old NSL and then Victorian Premier League. So having the ability to control a ball and pass a ball and speak the language of football, I wasn't necessarily the natural fitness coach who was gym based and looking at sports science and data. I could do sort of both, so the hybrid role. So what happened was, suddenly the head of performance was more of a rugby sort of perspective. He could see my value on pitch. And then suddenly it's the old adage, you start getting a little bit more rope, and then suddenly you're delivering gym sessions, you're delivering the GPS stats, looking at the overall periodisation model. But then suddenly you're giving a technical passing practice, a football fitness session, and then suddenly you're delivering to Premier League players. So within 3-4 months of being at Fulham, I found myself coaching Premier League footballers. You know, the ball under the arm, the whistle, showing authority and demonstrating your value to the team. And it was interesting at that point what I learnt what a coach was. Certainly as an assistant / fitness coach, one, I saw value in my role, and two, I could support, but the amount of learning I got from players at that point was crazy. You know, their perspective on things, passing practices being too short, too long, dimensions of technical passing practices or possession-based stuff. The information I got from them every day was just immense outside of the leadership team.
Fantastic. I mean, it's quite amazing when you think about that journey, isn't it? I think it inspires. It's inspiring, really, for any of those kind of young players that maybe didn't make it in the game and hadn't had the career in the game to 30, 40 years of age, but have been able to then, you know, transfer that and then get into that environment is brilliant. You worked with the 21s there, didn't you? And you know, in terms of the having worked with the senior players, what are the traits that you saw in those younger players that really got them to be able to train and go and play with the first team?
Yeah, that was a transition period. So the coaching staff changed. So and what happened is Kit Simons actually got moved into the head coach's role of the football club, and Peter Grant and I moved down to take the 21s. It was a bit of a slap in the face initially. Right. You're used to working at the elite level. You know, the ability to be in front of fans, and actually that adrenaline rush of match day, that completely shifted. So the internal motivation wasn't about the outcome of a result, it was about player development. I actually really enjoyed it. The energy is completely different. They are not designed, and you don't feel the energy throughout the week that you're playing Man United or Tottenham. They play on a Monday night in front of 4 or 5 people, generally scouts. So your motivation and leadership needs to shift as well, because the natural environment doesn't support that adrenaline rush and the willingness to compete. What I did learn was, 1, the communication, 2, that they are young men, they feel vulnerable, but also the perspective of, I was always hungry. I didn't get on that plane as a 24-year-old with patience. I wanted to land at the top, and I was only calling Premier League clubs because that was my dream. But what I see in young players is trying to take that step too early when they're not necessarily ready, and they don't understand that when you do make that mistake or make that step, more importantly, the pressure you'll be under to deliver consistently. So being that mentor for them to demonstrate some form of patience and support mentally. But what I enjoyed about that was, at the 21s level, it allows you to go a bit deeper rather than the team review and the team training. With the volume of fixtures at first team level, you don't really get much time for that, but spending one-on-one time with individual players positionally gives you so much scope to actually work with them technically, tactically, but also from that match analysis perspective as well. Yeah,
I mean, the word development is thrown around football a lot, isn't it? What do you see in terms of what are the main parts when you're looking to try to develop those players who are at that brink of breaking into the first team? As a coach, what are the areas that you're trying to provide them with?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because everyone goes to the sort of technical, tactical, physical element first, but I actually believe that the psychological component is really interesting because a lot of players can be talented but not have the psychological profile to deal with pressure. And let's face it, the minute you go to the first team, there's pressure. There's internal pressure from your teammates. You're getting judged the minute you step onto the pitch. Can you deal with the way to pass? Do you understand the patterns, the level of concentration required because the ball speed's higher? But more importantly, the understanding of the player individually is really important. So understanding their understanding of the game and their intelligence overall is really important. But more importantly, understanding them as a human really is the foundation for me. And a lot of people say that. And what does that actually mean? Well, for me, that means what's their drivers, what's their motivation, what's their learning style, what's their communication style. Because if you can understand that psychologically, you can impact them with more authority. So spending more time on how they learn, how you can communicate with them, because we've all had coaches that scream at everyone and some people react and some don't. So that afforded me the ability to get closer to the players. Because let's face it, if you think about the ceiling, the Damien Duffs of the world and these top players, they're so close to that ceiling, you can't improve them very much. But the young players' adaptation's so powerful. So really looking at them as an individual base and ticking those boxes physically, technically, tactically and psychologically as well.
I mean, going back to you as a coach, so when you've gone in at such a young age and you're working with those senior players,
yeah,
that must be quite daunting. How do you deal with that yourself at that young age?
You know, okay, so bravery and self-confidence and self-belief. For some reason, I had that in my locker. I don't know if I was driven to the extent that I believed I belonged there. And honestly, Chris, there wasn't a day when I walked in there in the first 2 or 3 months that I said, I'm out of my depth. I had this inner belief that this is where I belong. And I'll tell you a funny story. So the club obviously saw something in me whilst I was doing that fitness hybrid role, but I wasn't qualified technically. So the club invested in me with my C licence, my B, my A and my Pro. And I remember the day Lewis Boamorte and Mark Viduka, and we all sort of lived in the same area. And I hadn't known about Mark Viduka, although he was a famous player, but didn't know him personally. He was enrolled in the B licence. It was the West Ham's training ground. So Lewis Boamorte knew him, and he said, we're going to, carpool, and we're going to drive around the M25. You jump in the car with us. And I'm going, it's Mark Viduka. I'm not in awe of any player at Fulham, but then he was a legend in Australia, and I like what he stood for. He came from a humble background and went overseas and was just a phenomenal player. But I'll tell a story about that. So I remember the B licence. Really interesting about the self-belief in players. They can play, but now they're stepping into a new arena of leading a team. It was really interesting. So I'd been coaching for almost a year or so on field with these players. So that was nothing new for me. And I saw people like Mark Viduka, Lewis Boamorte, when the instructors said, who wants to take the first session? No one put their hand up. And I just grabbed the balls, grabbed my whistle and went, let's go. And I remember the drill, it was like a 4v4 plus 2 outsided bouncers, rotations and stuff like that. And I remember the amount of pros that came to me and going, who are you? Yeah. What's going on here? Because they didn't know me personally. I had no playing background and I was working in the shadows. But daily delivery compounds that confidence to step in front of a group of players with conviction. And I just think that's another level, delivering with conviction. Players hear and feel that level of confidence from you and just thrive off that as well. So that was a funny one. And I'm talking to you now and these stories are floating back, and it's quite ironic because I had no right to just step forward in front of these top pros that have played 500 Premier League games and go, move out of the way, I'm taking the first session. But I did, and that's the reality of the situation.
That's fantastic. And did you then step to then work with the Australian national team? Or
Yeah. I remember it was funny. In East London, I was having a curry with a couple of mates one night, and I saw this Australian phone number kept ringing me, and I was just blank. And then I thought, this guy's really persistent, whoever it is, I better take the call. And it was Ange Postecoglou. So I was very, very comfortable at Fulham. Obviously, they had looked after me from an education perspective, put me through all my coach's licence, put me through a second degree in sports psychology. So really saw something in me. But when the phone rings and it's Ange Postecoglou, you think, okay, this is cool. Once again, strangely enough, he invited me to the training camps to support him as an assistant coach, and with the same bravado, whether or not it's arrogance or ignorance, probably more leaning towards ignorance. I remember stepping out to the field in front of Lucas Neal, Tim Cahill, Jedinak, top Australian footballers that I watched growing up, and just led them. And Ange's the type of coach that he'll give you the scope and then ask you to go and deliver. And I just delivered the same way. And I remembered at the time, Chris, going, these players are nowhere near what I deal with at Fulham daily. The training quality is different. It doesn't feel as sharp outside of Lucas and Tim Cahill and Mille, for example. It was a different tier of player. So it allowed me a new experience. And pulling on the team tracking and getting on a bus in Sydney and going to games, representing your national team as a coach. Obviously didn't do it as a player, but as a coach, it's on my parents' wall in the study, and there's a photo of me. And you know what, coaching's something that's highly selfish, but also you do it for yourself, and no one can ever take that photo off the wall and say you haven't worked for Australia. And I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, I bet you are. It's amazing. And I mean, all these experiences helped shape you as a coach, and then you went and then managed in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, funny enough, I was on a course at St George's, and once again, I like to play music in the shower, just in the background, and I was fuming because I'm in the shower after doing my A licence, and the phone's ringing again, and I'm like, who's this clown disrupting the music whilst I'm chilling out at St George's in the Hilton up there? And it just wouldn't. So I turn the shower off, go out, and it's Ange Postecoglou again. And he's not the type of guy that will call you and check in and see how you're doing. When he calls, he either wants you to do something, i.e. take a job, or there's an opportunity. So I remember, yeah, Ange, how you going? He goes, so I want you to be the head coach of Newcastle Jets, but it's completely up to you. I was 33 at the time. And I went, okay. He goes, so if you say yes, someone's going to call you in 30 minutes. It's going to be the head of Football Australia, and they're going to want you to come to Sydney next week and speak to them. So hung up the phone. Sat there for a minute. I went, do I actually want to be? I'm living in Fulham. I actually had a few opportunities to go to other Premier League clubs on the back of grabbing those balls on that UEFA B. A few players came up to me and remembered me, and then 5 years later, they've gone into coaching roles. So that's an irony of leaving an oppression on people. And made the step, went to Sydney, and it was a formal interview, but it was one of those ones, I don't know if you've been there before, when you're sitting in the room going, I've got this job already. This is an interview. This is just a verification of whoever. I didn't take the job initially, Chris, because stepping out of the comfort zone of Fulham and the assistant coach, I was a bit fearful because I love the anonymity of the role. And ultimately becoming a head coach is a different beast altogether. But once again, same conviction, 33, just pushed the button and said, right, let's do it. And then 2 weeks later, you're packing your bags and you're moving back to Australia, albeit not home, but a couple of hours north.
And how did you deal with that? How did you approach having never been a head coach, but then stepping into, although it's your own country, you're stepping into a team. How do you even address the players initially? Yeah,
strangely enough, now, as you know, you only ever get a job as a coach if the coach moves or the club's failing. So the club was in a terrible situation. There was an ownership change just as I was being brought in. And ultimately finished last the year before with a lot of player revolt, a lot of challenges financially as well. So if you ask me, would I take that job now without that sort of level of wisdom of when you take a job? But I remember a couple of my closest mates, I said, the club's a basket case. What do you do? And they're like, you could become a head coach at 33 and you've worked so hard for this, back yourself. So interesting enough, walking into a club that's financially not secure and a lot of transition with players is scary. But once again, Chris just walked in there and went, right, this is how we're going to do it. Connected with the players and really worked hard connecting with the community as well. And I love being the head coach. It was the scariest, most fatigued moment 2 years of my life in terms of the demands mentally, and the isolation's real. Coaches speak about the isolation of it. You are dealing with challenges daily. But I love my time there.
Brilliant. And then after that, what happened?
So there was another ownership change at Newcastle 2 years later, and the vision slightly changed. And this is probably a really important thing for coaches to understand. You know, that sort of gut feeling you've got as a coach. It's either feels right or it doesn't. And during the transition of it, I started to feel a bit, this feels different. Not the control or the power, because I'm not a firm believer that the head coach needs all the control or all the power in a club. They just need to be aligned on vision, whether it be a recruitment strategy, whether it be budget, whether it be standards and expectations. They started to shift a little bit. So this was my first understanding of when Martin Jol said to me 10 years before, when I said to him in his office, I said, Gaffer, listen, I'm loving working with you, but I want to be a head coach one day. I want to do what you do. And he goes, just be careful, my friend. Just be careful. And I remember there was a big screen TV in the office behind him. He goes, one day, this will be my name. Breaking news, Sky Sports, Martin Jol sacked. He goes, the minute you make that step, it will be your name one day. So that I was a bit like, comfort zone. But if you've got that mentality that you want to lead players and you feel you can transform environments and connect with people, you've got to test yourself. And we spoke about this morning around profiling of assistants and first team and who can do it and who can't. It is a good test, but it really does mentally impact you as a person.
And you ended up going into sports tech.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Oh, sorry enough. Sorry, I didn't answer your question properly there. So, after Newcastle and leaving Newcastle, I actually got a call to go back to Europe, to a club in Denmark, which was great. It was a great experience. It was my first time outside an English-speaking environment. Fantastic club in the northern part of Denmark called Aalborg BK. The sporting director was a fan of mine back in the day. He tried to employ me. And at the time, I was in the Premier League, so you're not going to go to Danish Superliga. So that was a great experience from the perspective of non-English, different playing styles. The biggest challenge was the intensity I was used to, and demands and standards are completely different in that country. So I found it quite difficult with lackadaisical training and energy, and it wasn't what I was used to, and more importantly, it wasn't what I took to Newcastle, because I basically replicated what I learned and put it into Newcastle. But moving on from that, I needed a bit of time out, if I'm honest. After 20 years, I didn't know I did until I stepped away from it. And I was contacted by a young founder in Melbourne who I actually knew. I tried to sign him for my club in Australia a few times, and he was a professional at Western United. And he goes, I've got this idea. There's this AI thing flying around. What if we augmented data, whether it be match or training or physical data, and had the ability to have a chatbot sitting inside it that you could speak to from your phone or like ChatGPT environment and query it? And I went, yeah, that could help, because I've spent hours and hours and hours and hours looking at dashboards or Excel files, interpreting data to build out training plans, whether it be individual or as a team. So we built that out, and over a 2.5 year period, we scaled from him and I in a bunker in Collins Street in Melbourne to having close to 25 staff, and relocating to Belfast and having an office in Melbourne and Belfast. And that was a great experience. But you know what? The strange thing about it was, although I'm not a tech, I understand tech. I can turn on an iPhone and send an email. I'm not that bad, but I'm not that basic. But what it taught me was building a company is no different to taking over a club. From finding the right staff, identifying the right skill sets. What it did was it allowed me to bring my brain and IP from what practitioners want in sport and what they need to drive efficiencies, to find those insights quicker, to be a better coach, and more importantly, feed that information back to players as well. So that was an incredible journey. The business is still flying. We embed our technology in loads of sports tech companies, and we sit underneath the hood that powers their AI capability.
And how, from Mina Cup perspective,
yeah.
We're getting players from all over the world at the moment that are coming in playing in the competition.
Yeah.
And how can they benefit from obviously the what's happening in tech at the moment in a sporting aspect? Yeah,
well, the biggest challenge when I was sitting down with James, we spoke about the fragmented perspective. So if you look at a Premier League club, they might have between 10 and 20 different data providers, and by data providers they could be GPS, they could be wellness or nutrition, basically software platforms that data is ingested and then it's interrogated. So I thought to myself, or we thought to ourselves, if we could create a system that sits on top of that as the intelligence layer, that all those systems talk to each other, surely there's going to be better communication between staff, because I can correlate fitness stats with nutrition and wellness and match data all in one thread, which means the value of the data to the club is more valuable because it's not sitting in silos. But from the ability of a coach, imagine physically being able to drag and drop games, live video, fitness stats, training stats, wellness stats into one environment, and then have the environment just to ask questions of it. Tell me about these players today. Tell me what team I should select based around the last 6 weeks' games from a physical load perspective. And then the AI will actually look at that data and give you predictions on, not tell you how to win a game, but certainly identify from a scouting perspective the weaknesses and strengths and areas to exploit. Because there's so much data out there, but the reality is we don't have the time to interrogate to that level. So from a youth perspective, If I'm a young player, I drag in my games, I drag in my fitness data, and then I ask it, right, with this training load for the last 6 weeks, what should my next training block look like? What are my strengths and weaknesses technically? Where do I need to improve? And more importantly, what should I eat? How should I recover? Because the idea is it's a knowledge bank that allows you to query it, which I just see value in that, because even at first team level at Fulham way back in the day, players didn't see stats. Generally they didn't see stats. The coaches would sit there with the Pro Zone or Y-Scout and the video, and then the first time the player sees it is on the screen and it's all edited. If players can access that, then they're making better decisions off the field as well. So that's what we aim to do.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, going back to the coaching side for a moment, your coaching qualifications, you mentioned you went all the way up to the pro license. What do you get from the coaching qualifications? What are your biggest takeaways from them?
Yeah, well, another surreal experience was my A license, and it's at St George's Park. You've obviously been there, and what a facility, phenomenal. But then you've got a Champions League winner being your instructor. So first of all, you've got a wealth of knowledge that is really engaged with being a teacher. And you've got your small groups, you've got your ability to speak to ex-pros over dinner, over a beer at the end of the day. But that level of exposure was huge. And when I think about my 11v11 topic that was given to me, it was, I think my front partner, I had Steve Stone and in midfield, and then Dwight York and James Beattie up top, and these guys are so proficient at what they do, and I'm seeing other pictures, the names can't come to me now, and you want them to make mistakes because you need to go in and coach it, but they're so good at what they do, you have to actually call them out. So I remember a few times I'd blow the whistle and go, right, stop, you're not doing it right. And they're looking at me going, what are you talking about? This is Dwight York, for example, asking him to hold the line and stay high, and he's dropping into the pocket and stuff like that. So the reality is, the experience of coaching qualifications are so vast. I found my experience so valuable, not only from a network perspective, the job opportunities I've had just showing my personality and my belief and my qualities as a coach came through, but the knowledge imparted was phenomenal and so enjoyable. And
now, being in the UAE, the great country it is, from a coaching aspect, do you fancy coaching out here?
Yeah, I do. I moved here with the idea of the last thing you want to do is move to a new country and accept a job before you know the league, potentially understand the landscape politically, but more importantly, understand the opponents as well and who's who. So I've been spending the last sort of 6 months getting around as many games as possible just to get an idea of the level and seeing how that correlates and potentially where I could see my skill set having an influence. It's an interesting league. I mean, we've spoken about it before. You look at the infrastructure, some of the stadiums, Jabal Ali, I was down there yesterday as well, and you look at the pitches and the quality of the changing rooms, you think, right, there's a lot of infrastructure here that is beneficial. However, the volume and clubs not having their own environments is obviously a challenge. I've lived that before. Australia is very similar. You rent stadiums, you rent training grounds. But I see it as a destination for not only older players, which generally it probably has been at the back end of their career, come out here, but that pathway certainly from Australia, come here first, have 3 or 4 years at a proper league, being full-time, and then make that transition as well. So I'm excited to see what comes up in terms of the conversations I'm having and getting clarity on where I could best fit and prove value.
And that would obviously be in that head coach's role.
Do you know what? It's when you've spent 20 years in the game at different levels, whether it be high performance, assistant or head coach. For the last couple of years outside of coaching and being involved in technology, that strategic advisor, working with clubs as that sort of floating sporting director and link in between CEO, looking at the operations of the football club and diagnosing where they can improve, whether it be through tech or people, and aligning academies on playing system and pathways as well. So, I'm not closed off. My brain naturally is driven for strategy and analytics, but the excitement of leading a team and seeing development daily and being on that pitch, as all coaches say, they miss being out on the pitch. I don't know why, because players can do your head in at times, right? But I think it comes down to, Chris, seeing an impact and improving people and seeing them enjoy their careers, because too many people take football too serious. It's a job, yes. It pays the bills, yes. We've got a responsibility, but it's one of the best jobs a player and coach can have. And you've got to enjoy those moments. And you'll never know that until you step out for a couple of years and you go, yeah, right. Would I approach it differently now?
Yeah, brilliant. I've really enjoyed this. I'm going to fire some questions at you now,
Okay.
though, all right? Best quality in a young player?
I would say, you said quick fire, sorry, I'm just calibrating. I would say mental attitude, and that can encompass a lot of things, but openness to learn and mental attitude.
Most overrated thing in football?
Okay. There's a trend at the moment I'm seeing in the Premier League, and I'm bored watching it, and we've spoken, and I speak to a number of people, back third possession, and centre-backs and goalkeepers touching the ball more than a striker or an attacking midfielder.
Most underrated thing in football?
The workhorse in a team, the utility player that can play numerous positions, that adds value, who's reliable. They're my favourite player.
Biggest red flag in a coach?
Okay, we see this a lot. Lack of understanding and emotional intelligence and ability to regulate themselves. That would be mine.
Harder thing to build in a coach or a player, actually, let's say, in a player, confidence or discipline?
Wow, they're equally aligned. Hardest thing, I think discipline through behaviours and actions and how you speak to the player, and more importantly, the standards you set is probably easier. I find confidence is probably harder because confidence can change daily, but it's about teaching the player that mistakes happen and you're learning from it.
Great, thank you. And then just moving on to, from a Mina Cup perspective, obviously as a tournament that's not just for international players to come in, but also from a UAE perspective, how important is it for young players to play in tournaments?
Yeah, well, this is probably one of the biggest tests I've seen in Australia, that the academies, and here's a case study for you, they're so worried about physical and a physical load that most of the academies players only play 50, 60, 70 minutes a week. And then you see the rolling subs, there's 11 new players on essentially. For training load and wellness and RPEs and stuff like that. I see that as a massive detractor, because you and I have both played the game, and through mental fatigue and physical fatigue, that's when you learn more about yourself mentally, but pushing those boundaries physically as well. So the ability for players to be activated through tournaments like your own, one, they're getting exposed to a different brand of football, i.e. the opponent's different. It's not the team you play 2-3 times a year in your own backyard. You're being exposed to a different breed, technical and potentially philosophy as well. I'm a massive advocate for it. I think when I see kids playing in tournaments and things like that, I love it, because they're so far out of their comfort zone. It could be a different team, different teammates, different coach, but more importantly, the exposure of being in a team, staying in a hotel, living like a pro, being exposed to that level of demand and growing as a player, because essentially that's your life. You'll live in a hotel, on a plane, with the same 30 guys for 12 months at a time, and being exposed to that's really important.
Right. And from a parent's point of view, obviously you're a parent yourself, how do you find the balance between winning and developing, particularly the younger ages?
I think it's a fine line. I think the message is really important. You referenced parents there. I've worked with a lot of players one-on-one, and a lot of the education goes to framework around how the parent connects with the kid or the player. The first question can't be in the car on the way home is, "Oh, you didn't do this today," or "I didn't see you doing this today," or "You lost today." It's got to be about open-ended questions that support the player. It's got to be, what did you learn today? What challenged you today? What would you work on next? That type of open-ended question supports that. Ultimately, playing in these tournaments for these players is what it needs. It will support their ability to be identified. It will challenge them mentally and expose them to the next level of football.
Brilliant. We're going to go to another little fun round.
Okay.
This or that round, we're calling it.
This or that.
Talent or mentality?
Mentality.
Technique or athleticism?
Technique.
Game intelligence or intensity?
Game intelligence.
Academy football or street football?
Both. I think we need to get back to raw street football as well, where it's one-on-one, body load, fight, grit.
Consistency or moments of brilliance?
I'm an advocate for consistency.
Tournament exposure or a daily training environment?
Both. Is that allowed?
That's allowed. And a final closing question. One message you'd like to leave with young players, parents and coaches listening to this episode?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, dreams are only become a reality if you've got the commitment and the right attitude to do so. I detest actually when I hear coaches writing players off too early. You look at the maturation between 12 and 14 and how players can change physically during these periods of time, but how the physicality can impact their technique as well. So my advice to players is you're limitless. Your mindset and your self-talk can really impact where you can get to. But more importantly, don't look at the Premier League as the final outcome. There are so many players that I know that are playing and are professionals in different leagues all over the world. You are a professional the minute you become full-time, and you can earn a living out of the game. So don't only think you've failed if you don't make the Premier League, because the ecosystem is massive in football. But work rate, mindset, and consistency is the most important thing.
Brilliant, mate. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Fantastic to hear about your career and snippets of stories. Obviously, I look forward to hearing more of those off camera. And what I actually really look forward to seeing the impact that you will have on UAE football. So thank you very much, Scott.
Appreciate coming on board, mate. This is great stories you're telling, and it's I'll be watching all your next guests.
Great.
Enjoy.
Well, that was Mina Cup Inside the Game. Please like, share and subscribe. See you soon.